Hello, my name's John Darlington and I'm the author of a new book called Fake Heritage, which is published by Yale University Press. Welcome to this book launch. Like many others, a live launch is not possible at present, so I'm presenting this from my home here in London, which, if you're curious, is a floating one. It's an appropriately historic barge on the River Thames. However, whilst we cannot meet in person, one of the advantages of technology is that I can see where people are joining from, all the way down the left-hand side of my screen. And I'm delighted to see so many people coming from all the far corners of the world, from the UK, of course, where I'm based, throughout Europe, of course, as well, through North America, Asia, I'm seeing some people, and even a couple have joined from New Zealand. And I'm absolutely sure that they are part of my extended family, so thank you to them for getting up at such an unreasonably early hour. I'm glad this book has global appeal because fake heritage is a global phenomenon. Welcome in a way to a world of mock ruins, of sham castles and false Adams. Welcome to a place which is a mirage of walls and ceilings and occasionally entire towns. A place where buildings are but a single course deep and ancient monuments are seeded to give them the patina of age. Welcome to what I'm calling the Paleo-Ironic era. The structure of this session is as follows. In a minute, I'm going to explain a little bit about what this book is about, giving you a flavour of its contents by showing you a few examples and describing why I think it's important. At first glance, the topic might seem to be ephemeral, but the reality is that it's entirely relevant to today, especially during a time when fake news is the news. And new technologies are emerging now, which mean that it's becoming more and more difficult to determine the difference between old and actually not so old. After 15 minutes, I'm delighted to have been joined here on the barge by Sir Simon Jenkins in the wheelhouse, who many of you will know either through his thought-provoking journalism in The Guardian, The Times, The Evening Standard, or perhaps through his books. Now, Simon joined me earlier in the week at my home to chat about the nature of heritage fakery and reconstruction, and I think you'll enjoy that conversation. Finally, we're going to end with a traditional Q&A, and that's going to be an opportunity for you to ask me questions, and I'll do my very best to try and answer them. If I can't answer them, well, frankly, I'm just going to make it up, because this, after all, is about fake heritage. The book is not a whodunit. The perpetrators of heritage fraud are often well known, and some are so frankly embarrassingly incompetent that it's a wonder why anyone would believe them in the first place. Instead, this book is a why do it? Why emulate or fake heritage? Why build a ruined castle or lay out a pretend town, or perhaps assemble our early ancestors from a Jabberwocky of animal parts? What are the reasons for physically reconstructing or falsifying the past? And the answers are multifold. They range from the downright evil to the virtuous. Some are positively heroic. And the obvious reasons for hoaxers to fabricate history include the fact that some people are desperate to achieve fame or celebrity. Others, however, are just simply in it for the money. For them, it's all about greed. But there are many other reasons for recreating the past: revenge, belief, chicanery, academic credibility, or perhaps to grab the headlines in a need for entertainment, the desire for reflected glory, or maybe the demands of aesthetics, whether you want to fit in or stand out from the crowd. Perhaps you need to mimic what's gone on before to appropriate the past's heroes, and perhaps to justify present-day villainy. Or maybe fake heritage can be a force for the good, to conserve a fragile archaeological site through replication. And all of those motivations shape the structure of this book. So let's turn to some of those examples. Fake heritage is all about illusion, and illusion surrounds us every day. Take this wheelhouse, for example. It has all the appearance of a solid structure, but actually it's not. The roof above me detaches into 3 different panels, and all the windows on every side fold down. And that way we can glide under the lowest of bridges to travel further up the reaches of the Thames, the Rhone or the Rhine. Let me demonstrate. So let's get rid of this here. Okay, and let's get rid of that there and that there. And finally, let's be rid of that. As you can see, it's an illusion. So let's turn to our first example. And the starting motivation is one of those obvious ones, the pursuit of money or greed. Let me take you then from London to the Crimean Peninsula to the Ukraine, where excavations in the 1890s revealed an extraordinary discovery, a beautiful golden crown or tiara dating to the 3rd century BCE, essentially a gift from the time of Homer from the Greeks to a nomadic Scythian king. The Scythians have long captured popular attention. Shakespeare refers to them as the barbarous Scythian, Herodotus refers to them in the 5th century BCE, and in the 19th century, discoveries in the Ukraine actually garnered public attention across Europe and North America. In the early 1890s, another extraordinary discovery came to light, and this was a conical headpiece found by a local villager in the Ukraine, in Olbia, and subsequently acquired by the Hochman brothers, who were art dealers from a nearby town. The tiara, as it became known, is a magnificent artefact. It's a crown of repoussé gold, and under the coiled cap is a snake that coils and looks skyward. Under that is a panel that shows scenes from the Iliad, so the funeral of Patroclus, Odysseus stealing the horses of Rhesus, and Achilles handing over his beloved concubine, Briseis, to Agamemnon. A narrower panel shows men hunting in the forests, horses being sacrificed, and children taught how to handle the short bow, which are very common features of Scythian life. And in between the two is a narrow band of a fortress wall, interrupted by watchtowers and inscribing in Greek with the words, "The Senate and the people of Olbia to the great invincible Sataphernes." In 1896, the Hochmans displayed the tiara in Vienna before offering it to sale to a variety of museums, and there was a kind of scrabble of interest. And in the end, the Louvre purchased it. Rather ominously, I have to say, they purchased it on the 1st of April 1896 for 200,000 francs. Now, the crown is everything that the 19th century public hungry for the sight of the Scythians would expect, but doubts were soon raised the moment the Louvre announced its acquisition. In particular, people pointed out that there were many copyist errors on the crown. So a cauldron form, for example, which had only recently been discovered through excavation, was shown on it. There are numerous unthinkable puto as little wind gods floating above Patroclus's funeral pyre, and whilst the tiara was weathered, the pitting and scratches of time were restricted only to the areas between the decoration, leaving the latter rather miraculously untouched. The story hit the press, and the press made a great big thing out of it with great glee, and eventually the story came back to the creator of the tiara, someone called Israel Rushamovsky in the Ukraine, and he admitted that he had actually created the tiara but not as a piece of forgery. He created it as a commission from the Hochman brothers, which was to mark the retirement of a much admired archaeological professor from Kharkov. The Louvre finally conceded defeat when Rushmovsky recreated parts of the tiara, and I have to say their embarrassment was much to Rushmovsky's gain, because he acquired many commissions after that. But the piece of the story that's often missing in the telling of an uncovering of the tiara at Saturfernes is actually the role of the Hochman brothers. They were grain merchants and part-time art dealers, and they were also serial fraudsters who exploited that market for a passion and interest in the Scythians in the 19th century. And their motive? Well, their motive was purely about profit. Rushmovsky was paid 2,000 rubles for his tiara, or the equivalent of, say, 50,000 euros today. The Hochmans, on the other hand, received 200,000 francs from the Louvre when they sold it just a year later, the equivalent now of up to 2 million euros. This is about pure greed. Art is a motivation for heritage fakery. And one of my favourite stories, albeit a short one, in the book is about the discovery in a French field in the Loire in the 1930s of a half-scale statue by the French farmer Jean Gonon. Now, Gonon discovered the statue and he immediately took it to the experts, who identified it as a statue of Venus dating to the 2nd century BCE, probably a Roman copy of an earlier Greek masterpiece, and therefore possibly attributed originally to the great Phidias himself. It subsequently became known as the Venus of the Turnips, and Gonon would go on to charge visitors to view the discovery. A whole range of experts lined up to declare its authenticity, and in May 1938 the statue was actually given the status of a French monument historique. Unfortunately, less than 6 months later, the work of art was revealed not to be 2,200 years old, but just 2. Francois Cremonesi was an artist with a point to prove, and he carved his Venus from white Carrara marble in 1936. And to add to its feeling of authenticity, he removed the nose, the right hand, the left arm, and he fractured the statue just below the knees, before then burying it in Gonon's field. Why would he do that? Well, undoubtedly it was to make a name for himself, but also to prove that modern sculptors were every bit as talented as those from antiquity. "It's not Phidias, it's me," he declared in the headline of La Loire newspaper. The statue was, of course, rapidly removed from its historic listing. But in a twist to the end of the story, Cremonesi was unable to reclaim his sculpture because he couldn't prove himself to be the original artist. And despite actually providing the missing limbs and the model for his modern-day Athena, a court in Montbrison was unconvinced of his authorship and ruled that it should remain the property of the farmer. The undisputed leader of copyist heritage is, in my view, undoubtedly China, particularly in modern times. Not only does the country boast several replicas of the Eiffel Tower and indeed replicas of Paris, but it also possesses samples of Moscow, Washington DC, and architectural swatches from nearly every other major global city. There are sphinxes, there is a picturesque Austrian village, the World Heritage Site of Hallstatt, which has been replicated, and in that village everything is copied, from the main square to the 18th century Lutheran church and the flower-bedecked balconies. So the Chinese particularly have a passion and an interest and a particular skill in copying heritage. Some of these are purely about entertainment. No one, of course, is going to mistake Barry and Jones's Tower Bridge with the double vision example that spans one of Suzu's canals, or confuse the staring array of Maui heads lining the paths of Beijing's business area with those from Easter Island. But there's also something more interesting going on some of these sites. The One City, Nine Towns plan was initiated way back in 2001, and this was particularly interesting because it was a part experiment to test alternative models for city living in a country where the Newtown norm is one of actually quite monotonous medium rise uniformity. It was also partly a marketing device to attract Shanghai's growing middle classes to live there. And the idea was to construct 10 distinctive new town centres using different countries as inspiration. So there would be a city, a class 2 city, which was represented by England, and there would be a number of class 3 towns from Germany, from North America, from Spain, from the Netherlands, from Italy, and so on and so forth. Thames Town is the city, and it takes its inspiration from the historic centres of Bath and Oxford and the kind of quaint Englishness. And between 2003 and 2006, the town contains many of the historic characteristics of a typical English market town. It has a church, there are 3 squares, appropriately Love Square, Holiday Square, and Municipal Square. There are cobbled streets, Georgian and Victorian style buildings, half-timbered cottages, a fish and chip shop, and a pub. English names prevail, so it's Kensington Garden, Oxford Street, Chelsea Street, as do many of the cliches of British life. So red telephone boxes, traffic lights on white poles, and caretakers, fascinatingly, in red uniforms that are imitative of British Grenadier Guards, less the bearskin hats. There's also a range of statues from Winston Churchill through to Harry Potter. So whilst we might laugh at these towns, there's also a serious attempt to learn from other places, recognising the fact that standard Chinese models for new towns have led to this endless grid of orientation, of size and regularity, of dreary functionality. And so this was an attempt to try something different. Sometimes a building becomes as much part of the learning experience as its contents. A great example here. In 1897, a full-size replica of the Parthenon was constructed in Nashville for the Tennessee Centennial Exhibition. What, after all, could be more appropriate for the Athens of the South than the world-famous temple to Athena? And what building style could reflect on the pride of American democracy than architectural reference to the world's oldest democracy? The Nashville Parthenon was made of plaster, wood and brick, and it contributed considerably towards the exhibition's success. Over 1.6 million people visited during the 6-month period. It wasn't the only replica of the exhibition. Not to be outdone, the pavilion and headquarters of Tennessee rival Memphis was built nearby, taking inspiration from an ancient monument of their namesake city, of course, the Great Pyramid of Cheops. Who will be the man who will strike the first blow at the Parthenon? Asked Tully Brown, a Nashville businessman, while 35 other centennial structures were being dismantled. And such was the affection for the building that it was never taken down and remained a centrepiece within a public park. Unfortunately, the building had deteriorated significantly over the years, and it was decided to rebuild it in concrete and render, and a team specifically went to Athens to ensure that the permanent reconstruction was historically accurate. The new replica opened in 1931. And what to put in the building? Well, It was the exhibition's art gallery and remains the city's today, proudly exhibiting 19th and 20th century American artists. Here then is a place where education, entertainment and identity coalesce in a building that reflects Nashville's dedication to learning. The very reason the city became known as the Athens of the South was because of the large number of colleges and educational institutions established there from the early 19th century onwards. Here then is replication as a form of education. What I found absolutely fascinating about the research for the subject of fake heritage were the bizarre and the fascinating stories that would absorb me for days. Stonehenge is one of those examples because Stonehenge, the prehistoric stone circle in Wiltshire in the United Kingdom, has spawned at least 4 anatomically accurate full-scale replicas, one in Australia and a complete version in Mary Hill in the United States. The Mary Hill version was actually constructed to honour the fallen of the First World War and was dedicated on the 4th of July 1918. It's the first memorial to commemorate the US servicemen who died during the Great War. The more I looked into Stonehenge, the more alternative versions I would find, some frankly ridiculous but deeply amusing, from Foamhenge and Phonehenge and Boathenge and Fridgehenge to Carhenge. Now, no one would mistake Carhenge from the original, but this structure in Nebraska, also in the United States, comprises 39 vehicles that are placed to mimic the arrangement of Stonehenge. Even the heel stone is a 1962 Cadillac. The reason for constructing it? Well, yet again, it was constructed by the owner as a memorial to his father, and the henge itself was dedicated on the 1987 summer solstice. These are really just a very small fraction of the stories and motivations that I explore in the book. We've merely scratched the surface, so there's no time to tell you about the Cardiff Giant, or Damien Hirst's Wreck of the Unbelievable, or the faux frontages found in London, New York or Paris. No time to explore Saddam Hussein's reconstruction of Babylon, or the replica caves at Lascaux and Chavez in France that serve to protect some of the world's most important prehistoric art. No time to scan a critical eye over Venice's skyline, or the reconstructed core of Ypres, Warsaw or Frankfurt. Stories about Abu Simbel, the Alamo, and what to do in the aftermath when historic buildings are destroyed by fire or are the target of terrorism will all have to wait for another time. Unless, of course, you have the book. Last week, I was joined by the journalist, broadcaster and author Sir Simon Jenkins. We talked about the nature of fake heritage over the course of a morning. Here are just a few extracts on the nature of authenticity and reconstruction.
I find everything to do with the past absolutely central. It's just almost for being a human being. And the idea that there's in some sense deception involved in this, a sort of, a cultural anathema.
Yeah. So again, I'm an archaeologist, and for me the past is absolutely critical because I think the accumulated heritage that we have gives life to our villages, our places, where we live, what we do. It's you can't deny the past. I think the reason for writing the book was to actually draw attention to the fact that the past is a very selective thing. It is something which people can be deceived by, or it's something which people can create a different past in a different place. So I think that's really what I'm trying to highlight, that there are many versions of the past. There's many versions actually of the truth, And this book picks out some of those which are great, really good, and some of those which are actually bad. Saddam Hussein, I'd say his reconstruction of Babylon is motivated not necessarily by conservation, but it's motivated by his desire to be connected back to Nebuchadnezzar and his association with that kind of ancient Mesopotamian king. So I think for me, it's trying to just put the spotlight on the fact that there are multiple pasts and they can be portrayed in different ways, and we have to be careful, we have to understand motivation. What would be your view about the reconstruction of, say, Notre Dame Cathedral?
I have absolutely no problem with it. This is a building that millions loved, adored. To them it represented Paris, France. For goodness sake, who's got a problem? They want it rebuilt. They're prepared to pay for it to be rebuilt. There aren't any other ones like it. It is the only one around, and you know exactly what it looked like. I'm an extremist, but I mean, I would. There's so few old things nowadays. I want to keep all of them. Now, authenticity is a very, very difficult word to me. It's the curse of much in conservation. Um, uh, for instance, an authentic Tudor building is probably not Tudor at all.
Yep.
Every bit of it's been patched and so on.
Yes.
But it's still, in some sense, a Tudor building carrying this gold star badge of authenticity. It's like what is an authentic vintage car? It's one where every bit's been replaced, not at the same time.
Yes.
But authenticity, in its limiting case, gets down to materials, truth to materials, and that's where I'm really worried.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if to be authentic, you've got to have the right stone, sorry, the original stone or wood or whatever it might be, or paint. That to me is I would say elitist, but it's an erudite and unnecessary purity. When the meaning of a building, particularly talking about buildings, to most people is its appearance and its context, not its authentic materials. And so I find authenticity to be a very limiting word in one sense, but in another sense important in the more general sense. Authentic to what?
Yes. So I would actually agree with you on this one. I think that fascination with materials can be very dangerous. And you look at Stowe House, which is a magnificent 18th century building, but the closer you look at it, bits of it will be repaired in the 18th, 19th, 20th century. We put statues back there just last year. So one facade might look 18th century, but actually when you look in the detail, the grain of resolution shows you that it's multiple periods and those are being replaced all the time. So I think there is an obsession, I agree about that, concentration on materials. I think the interesting thing is actually context, yes, but I also think about the function of a building. So what's it actually used for? So one of the examples in the book, which I think is absolutely fascinating, is the shrine in Japan of Ise-Jingu, which is a shrine which has actually been replaced every 20 years. There's an exact replica. So they move from one plot to another plot every 20 years. And the action of replicating the building is actually the most important thing. It's not what the building is made of, it's the actual act of rebuilding it. And that philosophy, which is actually quite a Chinese, Japanese, far Eastern philosophy, is very much of what is the function of a place, what is the action, rather than the bricks and mortar.
I think it was in Australia where a mining company dug up an Australian sacred site or whatever it was, but clearly obliterated a very old and to some significant, I think made of earth, bit of heritage. And it caused general outrage, which is appropriate. Question: what do you do next? Now, I as an extremist, say no problem at all. We know exactly what it looked like. Go back in there and put it back. Curiously, there's a parallel in Palmyra, in the case of the Temple of Baal there, where the thing was, let's say, the arch was blown up.
Yes.
We have the dust. We have the exact composition of the stone of which it was made. We have photographic digital records of it. We have 3D printers. We can use the same materials, authentic materials, to reconstruct it as if we were the original architect handing to the original craftsman a picture to reproduce. What is wrong with doing that?
I guess it's the argument, the counter argument would be that it's the classic one, which we're hearing a lot at the moment, of erasing part of the most recent past in favour of trying to recreate a past which should never have gone. So that there's another lovely quote, I can't remember who it's by, but they describe part of the reconstruction of Polish and German cities as this almost just setting the clock back to before the disaster happened, because if you took natural life on its natural course, where buildings crumble and decay and new ones get constructed and old ones go, this sudden intervention of war has calamitously ruined the place. So all the approach is to just wind the clock back, so that you wind back, you wipe out the disaster and reset the clock. That's kind of the argument. Obviously, the counter argument to that, again, a contentious one, is that if you do that, then you're hiding the past. You're ignoring the disaster which happened, which should be commemorated in one way, shape, or form. So I think that those are the arguments and debate in there.
But the arguments, but one of them's right and one of them's wrong to me. I mean, yes, you're wiping out the past and it's gone, and winding the clock back is. But I mean, what's illegitimate about winding the clock back? I mean, we do it in every Shakespearean production. We do it in every art gallery. There's something about buildings that have lost the right to be restored or continued. And particularly, I mean, I'm afraid I'm extreme. Where acts of violence are responsible, somehow or other you honour the act of violence by leaving them there. That's what I found so extraordinary about the desire to leave bombed buildings ruined. I said, well, you don't have to do that. You have a choice. Yes, you're putting the clock back. You're putting the clock back when you walk through Canterbury. I don't see what this imagery, which I have to say always has behind it what I call the modernist fallacy.
Yeah.
That anything new is better than anything old, and you are against progress by demanding the restoration of what's old. No, I'm not. I'm helping you go forward with the presence of the old to guide you. That's why I see it.
Yeah. So the continuity of, again, my place in this is that I'm kind of rooted in what I describe as the distinctiveness and spirit of place. I keep on coming back to spirit of place. That for me is the most important thing. So for me, a place, if I go to Blackpool, I don't want Blackpool to look like Brighton. I want Blackpool to look like Blackpool. And part of the reason Blackpool looks like Blackpool is because of its past, which has accumulated this different and distinctive architecture and stories and function. So for me, that's I'm less at the extreme end of you, but for me, it's how do you retain and indeed enhance the spirit of places, so that wherever you go, again, part of the joy of going to Italy or France or America is not to go there and find the same thing that you find down the road here. It's to go there and find something which is it's rooted in that place. So that for me, that's where the past and heritage becomes alive for me. So what would you do? Let's take an extreme example of the Mosul. So you have the centre of Mosul, which obviously suffered great destruction through Daesh. We have the Al-Nuri Mosque, which was destroyed, and particularly the Al-Hadba minaret, which is this kind of tall but distinctly wonky minaret. How would you reconstruct that? Obviously, some people in Mosul absolutely want it reconstructed. Some people actually just want a mosque back. Some people don't want it reconstructed because it brings to mind kind of a historical narrative which is divisive. So it comes down to some of those really tricky decisions locally.
Well, what I liked in your book was you addressed that question in a sense, and the answer is you try and get as near to democracy as you possibly can. One of the problems of democracy is it tends to be guided by experts, and the question then is who are the experts that you're listening to? I'm not a resident of Mosul, and I would defer to them. The Bamiyan Buddhas, which I mildly got involved in an argument in UNESCO, where the local people desperately wanted them back.
Yeah.
And there were Germans arguing with French, arguing with English at UNESCO, and there still are. And local people can go hang. But I mean, to me, they were themselves heavily restored by Indians anyway. This is often the problem.
Yeah.
In Palmyra, however, was built by the French. Just leave that to one side. What are the people who care about where they are living and what they're looking at every day? What do they really want? And what, when they get it, would make them feel happiest? They aren't necessarily the same question.
Yes. Yeah. And I think there's also another interesting debate about where heritage is perceived as, say, global heritage. So how do you balance kind of a world view and a world aspiration for a place versus actually the people who live in the shadow of that place, and whether it's a landscape or a building. I think that can often bring all kinds of really interesting argument, and there's no clear way of actually navigating through, I don't think.
Let me ask you a slightly different question. You deal quite extensively with I mean, Disney in the best sense of what I call Disney. I mean, Disney's always fascinated me because we're both at the National Trust. One of the great accusations was you did anything different,
Yeah.
Disney, and I said yes. But one of the things that Disney extraordinarily intuited that the public like old things.
Yep.
What is it they like about them? Well, it reminds them of a different past from the present, and that's attractive to them.
Yes.
Whereas in 1984, all said the first thing you do is you eliminate the past. Names, everything goes, including your name. So everything else, which is not in 1984, is the past and its heritage. But the most extreme case of that is Disney or Disneyland. But there are various forms of that.
Yes.
I mean, the place I love in Wales is Portmeirion, which I don't think you deal with. Portmeirion to me is the only 20th century settlement on earth that people pay good money to go and walk around. And they do so because it was not intended as a pastiche or anything like that. It was intended by Clough Williams Ellis very specifically to be an architecture appropriate to the place in question, the ravine. Do you? I sense in the book that you are uncomfortable with these places.
Actually, no, not at all. So perhaps for edition 2, I need to correct that. I think so. What I like, there's an example would be if you go to Nashville, there's the Parthenon there, which is built for the Centennial Exhibition, which is this replica of the Parthenon on the Acropolis in Athens. And what I love about that as a site is that actually, if you were an ancient Greek transported back to the Acropolis, you'd probably be not very happy. But if you're transported back, and ignoring the climate and everything like that, if you're transported back to Nashville and you could see this reconstruction, it would be far closer to what you were actually used to. So I like that provocation, which takes you back to a place and makes you think of what it could have been like, what it would have been like. So again, as a child, my superpower in my head was not to fly or to have X-ray vision. It was always to time travel. So that's kind of my motivation. Is I love to imagine what it was like and recreate what it's like. So no, I like those provocations. I do like those provocations. And I quote Umberto Eco in the book, who has a lovely quote about how actually the experience of Disney is more real than the real thing, because you can get to see, as you're going down a paddle steamer on the Mississippi, in the Disney version, you get to see alligators, crocodiles, but in the real version, it's very rare. So I really liked that. So again, as a provocation.
In Jorvik, in York, I mean, it looks like Disney. In fact, it's the closest you get to real.
Yeah. Well, I can say for this time you really do join me live, and you can see it's got a bit dark outside. So genuinely, this is me live in London. I hope people enjoyed the conversation with Simon Jenkins. I have to say that was condensing 40 minutes down to 15 minutes, and in condensing it, I feel I've left Simon Jenkins gold on the cutting room floor. So I'm hoping that we'll find some way, shape or form to get the whole of that interview across so that people can see it. So that's further down the line. The second thing to say is that we recorded that interview prior to the latest lockdown measures in the UK, where social distancing was, we had more freedom to socially distance. Obviously, that is no longer the case now. The third thing to say before we dive into the Q&A is to apologise, actually. It's to apologise to everyone in South Florida, because South Florida is the only place in the United States I understand that you actually will get crocodiles. So you're not going to get crocodiles in the Mississippi, but don't blame me if you suddenly do get one. Please ask questions during this next 10-15 minutes. I will try my very best to answer them. I'm not seeing those questions on the screen, so if you see me looking at my telephone, they're being relayed to me by WhatsApp on my phone. So I'll be answering those questions as best I can. The first question I've got is a lovely one. I'm obviously going to like this one, and that is, where can I get a copy of the book? And the answer is, of course, all good online bookshops. But I'd strongly recommend, if you are interested in purchasing a copy, that you go to Yale, who are the publishers, their websites, either in the United Kingdom or the US websites, and order there, because they have announced that they're going to give 25% off for all participants, all attendees of this event. So if you're interested in purchasing a copy, go to their website. I'm going to flash up on the end of this presentation the details, and we'll send you those details after the event if you're interested in purchasing it. And I hasten to add, spoiler alert to my family, I know exactly what you're getting for Christmas. The next question I've got is what inspired you to actually write the book? And I can trace this back really very easily to Venice in 2017, when there was a extraordinary exhibition across two of Venice's palazzo. And that exhibition was of the treasures of the Epistos. And the Epistos was a 1st century BCE ship which sank off the northwest coast of Africa. And it was a ship which was owned by someone called Amatan, Sif Amatan II, to be fair, who was from Antioch. And he was an extraordinary collector of artifacts from all across the region. So from Rome, from Greece, from Egypt, across North Africa, all the way actually through India and beyond. And this ship was carrying all of these amazing artifacts, and it sank. The story rolls forward to 2010, when the ship was discovered, and its cargo was excavated by one of the best of archaeologists, the best underwater archaeologists in the world, and documented, in fact, by one of the best underwater photographers. Simon Sharma even gets a look in because he did some of the documentary research. And all of that stuff was transported to Venice and displayed in these palaces. And it's an extraordinary collection. There's a Laocoon, there's sphinxes, there's pharaohs, there's currency, there's pottery. It's just absolutely amazing. Amazing, that is, until you start to look at the detail of it, because as you look at the detail, you start to realize that actually this is not genuine, this is entirely fake. And the clue is in certain things, such as Epistos, the name of the wreck, is actually the wreck of the unbelievable. That's ancient Greek for unbelievable. Sif Amatan II is an anagram for I am fiction. Some
of the statues begin to look very familiar. So you start to see the singer-songwriter Pharrell Williams as a pharaoh, Sienna Miller, the actress, as a sphinx, and so on and so forth, until you come to a statue which is of a rather rotund man holding the hand of a small child, and that turns out to be the artist himself, who was Damien Hirst, holding the hands of a barnacle encrusted Mickey Mouse. So that was the moment where I thought, this is something interesting here. The motivation of art to reconstruct the past. So that I can source the root of my interest back to that moment. The next question I've got is about what's one of my favourite stories in the book. I can tell you that I like some of the gentle stories. So there's a particularly lovely one set in the northeast seaboard of America, which is all about a publication called the White Pine Monographs, which are published in that area in the early part of the 20th century, and they're a celebration of architecture built out of white pine, which is historically used across Massachusetts, across Connecticut, and New England. And there's a particular volume of the White Pine monographs which has the story of the village of Stotham. And it's a lovely story. There's beautiful illustrations of churches and farmhouses. There's a town hall. There's a backstory about how the villagers of Stotham originate from a particular village in the United Kingdom. So it's a lovely story, and that story remained unchallenged for about 20 years until someone actually went through the archives and wanted to find the village of Stotham. And they couldn't find it. It was a complete, it didn't exist, and it doesn't exist. A little bit more interrogation found out that actually the buildings illustrated in that volume of White Pine monographs all exist, but they're scattered across those particular states of the United States. So they're genuine, but they don't belong to a village called Stotham. And again, further interrogation revealed that actually the editor of this volume had these amazing pictures and just simply didn't want to let them go. So he wanted to see them published. So as a kind of in-joke, he compiled this story around the village of Stotham. So it's a rather gentle in-joke. So those are the ones which I particularly like. There's a few questions coming on about how fake heritage, is fake heritage the right title for the book? And particularly given that many of the stories in the book are not about fraudulent activity in the sense of criminality, but they're about positive stories of reconstruction. So there's some good challenges, and I accept those challenges. And I confess in part that the title is driven by the fact that fake news is the news at the moment. So there's a bit of I have that obsession with that notion. But the book and the stories within the book do range from different levels of deception, and going from the fraudulent to the simply to the heroic. So we have fraudulent activity and we have heroic reconstruction. In all of those instances, I would argue that there is an element of deception. So if you bear with me, if you construct an early human, say the Piltdown Man saga in the United Kingdom, which was an early human constructed to be the earliest Englishman, it turned out to be a complete fake. It was made from the jawbone of an orangutan, the tooth of a chimpanzee, and a medieval skull. So it wasn't something which dated to 500,000 BC. It was much earlier later than that. That kind of fraudulent activity, or the tiara, which I've given an example, is all about deception. It's deceiving someone to think that you are the discoverer of something outstanding, or that you are wishing to take money from someone. So you have the obvious deception. In the middle of the examples which I use in the book, you also have deception with some of the ruined castles, for example. So if you were a 18th century gentleman in England and you wanted a particular type of folly or ruined castle, you would go to someone called Sanderson Miller, and he would construct you a castle which was ruined. It had ivy climbing up it. It would be partly built, and the thinking at the time was that you should be totally deceived by this. There are lots of quotations from people back in the 18th century saying that these must show the true rust of the Barons' wars. You must be deceived by them to be taken in by their messages. So the middle ground is there's still deception. The final example, which is perhaps the least obvious, is when we look at some reconstruction. So the caves of Lascaux or the caves of Chauvet in France have alongside them a reconstructed cave, because you can't actually get into the real thing, because the atmosphere and the dangers of people accessing that space would actually destroy the original art, which is outstanding. So reconstruction caves are created in both those cases, in fact many of them. And my argument would be that if you go into those caves, there is still that element of deception, because those caves, the reconstructed ones, are constructed to make you feel as if you're in the real thing. You are being asked to transport yourself to the prehistoric cave. The artwork is as accurate as possible. The sights and smells and sounds, the temperature is all absolutely spot on to transport you to the real thing. So whilst it's deception and it is self-deception, there's an element of that. So hence the title of my book covers that very broad church from, as I say, fraudulent activity through to heroic reconstruction. I'm probably running out of time now, and there are lots of other questions which if people want to email me, I shall try and answer. My email is very obvious from the World Monuments Fund website, but we're coming up to 50 minutes. So I apologize for a relatively short Q&A, but for me, it's been a very interesting one. Because we're running out of time, I promised you at the beginning of this Q&A that I would just give you some information about those if you wish to purchase the book itself. So hopefully there'll be some information on the screen now. There it is. So if you want to purchase the book at 25% off, then please go to either Yale's UK website or the US website and put in those codes. Don't worry if you can't remember those codes, we'll follow up with an email. The critical thing is to go to the right website. So if you're in the UK, you will know you're in the right website because it will be £. If you are in the US, you will know you're in the right website because it will be dollars. So please, if you're interested in purchasing, then there's an offer for you. It now just remains for me to thank a few people for all your help and assistance. So I'd particularly like to thank the World Monuments teams in New York and the UK for making this whole thing work. I'm very grateful for that. I'd like to thank actually my son, Jay Darlington, who was instrumental in some of the technical wizardry that you saw at the very beginning of this slide. So thank you, Jay, appreciate it. I would like to thank Simon Jenkins, of course, for his time and his input. So it was a great conversation. And I'd like to thank everyone else for joining me here. The next World Monuments Fund event is on the 30th of October, and that's going to be about the Confederate monument debate. So please, if you're interested in that, which is a very relevant, very live thing, please go and register for that event, because I think you'll find it extremely entertaining. And it now is left for me just to say thank you very much for attending. I hope you enjoyed it. Have a very good evening, a very good lunchtime, a very good morning, wherever you are in the world. And thank you and goodbye.